For years, cold cases have clogged police files when the clues run out. But investigators often know that someone has the answers to homicides, robberies, and white-collar crime. It often takes years, sometimes decades, for witnesses to get tired of holding the secrets. But recent forensic advancements have changed the odds of solving those unsolvable crimes. It required opening the doors to more DNA, looking at the family tree and the clues it holds. No longer confined to one-on-one searches, detectives can now match a brother, sister, cousin, who, even if they don't provide absolute evidence, they just might know someone who does. State Police. Hello, I'm Bill Curtis. Welcome to another installment from the files of the Illinois State Police. It's a new era of crime solving. It's called Genealogy DNA, and the subject of this episode from the files of the Illinois State Police. Here's Director Brendan Kelly.
All right, welcome to the Illinois State Police podcast. This is Brendan Kelly. I'm the director of the Illinois State Police, and today we're going to be talking about a subject that gets a lot of attention on television and social media and, of course, other podcasts, true crime podcasts. But it's actually a very real and important thing for the Illinois State Police and something that we've prioritized over the past few years within the Division of Criminal Investigation, and that is the investigation of cold cases. Cases where terrible crimes have happened, but the leads that we have and the investigative potential that we have just kind of dies off for whatever reason. And we'll talk about a few of those reasons, the challenges in terms of collecting evidence and why a case might go cold, but some success stories about how you can solve these cases and be able to identify someone and bring some closure to people and potentially even some measure of justice. And also, this is an opportunity for us to talk to the public about maybe a case or so that we need help with. The reality is that the Illinois State Police, all law enforcement, rely on the public for us to be successful. It goes back to the Pelian principles that we teach at the academy. The people are the public and the public are the police. We have to work together, and that is definitely true when it comes to the investigation of these cold cases. So as we get into it, let me introduce, I'm going to have you guys introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your career in the Illinois State Police, where you are now, and then we'll talk about cold cases. So please proceed.
Yep, I'm Justin Gonzalez. I'm a crime scene investigator with the Region 5. That's the Metro East, so near St. Louis, the east side of St. Louis.
Very familiar with it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's your old stomping grounds. So I've been with the state police for approximately 9 years now. Prior to that, I was a local deputy in Montgomery County and decided to come over and expand my working area.
Good choice. Sorry, Montgomery County. We stole them fair and square, as we often do from so many local jurisdictions. So where were you when you first were on the job with the Illinois State Police?
So with the Illinois State Police, I started in Effingham. So that was old District 12, and now it's Troop 7, I believe. And then as soon as I finished up the FTO process there, I was recruited over to crime scene for from some prior experience I had with the county with investigations. So I went right into there and haven't looked back.
Outstanding. Dan, introduce yourself.
My name's Dan Thomas. I've been with the state police since 1998. I started as an intelligence analyst here in Springfield, actually. And then I went to the academy in 1999 and then was assigned to District 2 up in Elgin. It's now covered by Troop 3. Spent a few years there. And then I went into narcotics. I did some undercover narcotics work for a little over 5 years in the North Central Narcotics Task Force.
I would like to have seen what that looked like.
It
'Cause,
was-
I mean,
it was
right
fun.
now, looking at you, for those of you listening, he looks about like out of central casting for the Illinois State Police, like career criminal investigator here. You know, he's about as squared away as you can be. You know, typical, but in a good way, ISP. But I'm not sure what it would look like if you were undercover. I'm sure those were some interesting outfits and appearance you may have
It
had.
was fun, yes. Let me put it this way. I once got reprimanded for cutting my hair, trimming my hair, I should say, by a boss telling me I needed to look dirty. So I took that to heart. And when I did finally cut my hair after I was out of the unit, my daughter came up to me with this real scared, confused look. I said, "Don't worry, it's me." And she said, "Well, you sound like Daddy, but you look like Uncle Dale." And so I said, "Yeah, it's me. Don't worry." So she didn't recognize me. Her teachers didn't recognize me.
Well, it's a transition out of those units sometimes. And so where'd you go after that, after doing narcotics stuff?
Well, when I got into investigations, I started in what we call general assignment, violent crimes unit. Went to narcotics, and then I went back there, and was there for a number of years. And then I went over to the Public Integrity Task Force in 2021. I was there until the end of 2024. And then I went into a position that we call violent crimes advisor, back to violent crimes, kind of a position, overseeing a lot of the different homicides and cold case files that are still active. And then now I'm in a position as an acting lieutenant over firearms investigations, and some of our specialty task forces, and the Public Integrity Task Force.
Very good.
So,
Special Agent Arias, tell us about yourself.
Sure. I started in 2013. I too am in Zone 1 up north with Master Sergeant Thomas.
Lots of crime in Zone 1.
Lots of
Keeps us busy.
We are very busy. I've been there I went there in kind of a leap of faith, and it's almost 4 years. It's a great place to work. I enjoyed a lot of different things that we can dip our toes into. Started in what was once known District 15, so the tollway.
The good old tollway.
The tollway, the land of milk and honey. And was there for about 3 years, left there, went to EPU, worked for the Ronner administration for about a year and a half. And then I went to the Red Team, to SWAT, for about 4 years before I decided to maybe try something different, and went to Zone 1, and it's been great.
That's great. And I love to hear people that have had different backgrounds and been in part of different parts of the Illinois State Police, because it gives you so much perspective. I think it's great when guys from SWAT will go into the zone, guys from the zone will go into SWAT or EPU, and you get that perspective, or you're in crime scene, or you've gone from narcotics to then public integrity. Those are all, very, very different things. And I think it's great for your career to get that different perspective. And I find that people are better at whatever they do if they've, got that broader experience. It's good. Sometimes these specialty units can be very sort of focused. And I think it's great when, at the end of the day, what are we here for, is and the kind of careers you're currently a part of, which is fighting crime, solving crime. We do a lot of different things, but at the end of the day, that's what it is. You're all trying to solve mysteries. That's what you do, and so that's why it's great to have you guys here to talk about one of the most difficult mysteries sometimes we have to solve, and that is our cold cases, cases that are frozen in ice. They ain't going anywhere, and we don't know what to do with what we have, but we just got to pick away at it and keep trying to solve the mystery. So, Master Sergeant Thomas, why don't you tell us about a success story that really kind of began all the way back in February, I think, of 2012, over 14 years ago now. So please tell us about it.
Well, this goes back to that violent crime advisor role that I was in, where I'm looking at some of these old cold cases. And in February of 2025, so almost exactly to the day, but in 2025, when this case initiated in 2012, this case was a maintenance worker was working along Cicero Avenue, and he was checking an area under the 294 overpass, or I'm sorry, the I-94 overpass in Chicago. And he found what appeared to be a homeless encampment. And so he went in there to investigate, which isn't, totally uncommon. They occasionally find those. They basically tell him, you can't be here. It's a restricted area. You got to move along. And He went there thinking that's what he was going to do. And when they pulled down this tarp that was up, they found a deceased individual. And he was not just deceased, but he was pretty severely or substantially decomposed by the time they found him. So,
and this was back in 2012.
2012, yep. February, it was cold. And, like I said, fairly decomposed. So like something you see out of Indiana Jones, like that type of decomposition. So he contacts the state police. Some troopers get there. They make their initial observations and call out investigations. And so Zone 1, where Andre and I are from, both responded. We weren't out on that one, but our zone responded to this. They made their initial assessments of the scene. The guy was seated in a camping chair. He had a substantial amount of property there, so it was indicative he had been there for quite some time. He had bicycles, two bicycles, lots of personal property, and he was just looked like very casual. He was, fully clothed and everything, but like I said, heavily decomposed, seated in this camping chair. So the ME, the medical examiner's office,
remains were in a chair.
Yep, just seated in a chair.
Died sitting.
Yeah. So one of the things that was kind of unusual about this is he's sitting in a chair, but he had like a cinder block on him. There were some knives, a spatula. If you just see these pictures and you weren't there, you're like, was this person, bludgeoned with this cinder block? Were they stabbed? What's going on here? But then you have to look at everything, back out, look at the totality. And the way he had the tarp, he had it up for like a wind block and privacy. But he had it, if you picture an I-beam, a steel I-beam running underneath I-94, the tarp was wrapped over the lip of that. And then it was weighted down by the cinder block. So when the guy pulled the cinder block down, that fell on him. The knives fell on him. He had that was like his kitchen utensils were up there. And so when he pulled that down, not knowing someone was going to be on the other side of it or a body was going to be on the other side of it, those things came down and they happened to land right on him.
So with the state of decomposition and the condition of the remains, was it even possible, just looking at the remains or through an autopsy or examination of the remains, was it even possible just from that to tell, what the cause of death was?
No. So, in fact, to this day, they still have not officially, his death certificate says for cause and manner of death says undetermined. And that's the way it's going to be because, we think we know what happened, but they can't say and they're not going to say because you don't know. There is still the possibility that, something more than what they know. He could have had a heart attack. Can't tell that.
No heart there.
The organs are, decomposed. So there's nothing to test, nothing to
look at, no way to look at stab wounds because there's no, nothing left much, I suppose.
No way to look at it on tissue, but they did examine the bones. The medical examiner did an autopsy just like they would, and then they recruited the help of forensic anthropologists. Okay. So this is a special case. Not everybody obviously gets a forensic anthropologist to look at their body when they die, but in this case they did.
What's a forensic anthropologist?
Well, that's someone who's going to, from a court sensitive approach, they're going to look at the remains of a human body. They're going to look at the bones for any evidence of, like you were saying, stab marks, any tool marks, anything on the bones that are going to indicate that maybe they were stabbed.
It could be marks on the bone.
Yeah.
You don't have an open stab wound to examine because there's nothing, the material has decomposed, but the bones may still be there and you may see some markings or some scratches or whatever the correct terminology is.
Exactly.
Have on there.
It could see breaks. And then what's interesting is they can look at, let's say there is a fracture in the bone. They can determine based on their science whether the break is new, old. They call it post-mortem, after death, perimortem, around the time of death, or antemortem, before death. So this guy did have some antemortem findings, some missing teeth. They said that those didn't happen around or after death. They happened before. He had a slight fracture of I believe it was the zygomatic arch. I believe I'm not obviously a medical person, but that's a bone that runs along the jaw, kind of in front of the ear.
Okay.
And they said that was antemortem, so before death, something that had been there and healed. He also had some issues with his spine, a missing cervical vertebrae, so up around the neck. And then they actually were able to determine through their, close forensic inspection of these bones that was a genetic feature of this individual. So something he was born with. And I'm trying to think if there are any other ones. I think that was basically it.
So from the forensic anthropological examination, not just the medical examination, you've got a person here that has experienced some traumas at some point, lost their teeth for some reason. Maybe it's medical, or maybe it's, as a result of an injury. And then obviously a serious, fracture to their jaw at some point, broken, but maybe well before the time that they died.
Right.
Someone with some genetic problems. That's a, potentially important piece of information, because if you're trying to figure out who this is, there may be some genetic tie to somebody who has similar genetic issues if we're trying to identify who the family is. And then you've got some physical evidence of a cinder block that may have fallen, some knives that may have fallen, and that's kind of what you're working with at this point.
Right. So
out of all that, what was the theory of what happened? Can you even put together a theory from those pieces of evidence?
Well, a lot of this stuff unfortunately wasn't documented in the reports, like about theories and things like that. And one, to be fair, I mean, we don't put our opinions in our reports. We don't put, especially when a case is early on, like when it's a fresh case, you're not putting opinions and theories and things like that. Right. So that stuff's not in there. I mean, granted, the investigators probably had their own theories and things like that, but they're not in our official reports. So I'm just looking at photos. I'm looking at police reports, and I'm looking at, the photos of the scene that I was not at. And I think everybody there, the first trooper who responded said something to the effect of no evidence of foul play. Now, he's not a forensic expert. He's not a homicide detective, but he's a police officer. He's got observation skills, and you have to take what that line in his report says. It says no evidence of foul play. So I trust that in his opinion, whether it's, from a forensic standpoint or not, he didn't think there was foul play.
But one key point, nobody at that early stage, when they're investigating in 2012, is able to determine who this person is.
Exactly.
There's no ID.
Right.
Nobody found a driver's license on them. Nobody had a witness nearby that said, "Oh, that was Bob Smith or John Jones." Nobody was able to, at that early stage, figure out who this person really is.
Right. So the big clues, they start, and like I said, there was a lot of personal property there, and it had been exposed to the elements. Obviously, some of it was actually on his clothing. So now you're talking like going through clothing of a decomposed individual and things like that. One of the things that they found was a eye doctor's bill. It had a name on it. Well, an eye doctor's bill isn't identification, so they were starting to think they knew who this person was based on that name, so they're like, we got a lead, let's run with that. They also found at the scene, not on his person, but at the scene, they found a Chicago Police Department report. The name, it had been weathered so bad the name wasn't visible, but the report number still was, thankfully. So they were able to go over to Chicago PD, pull that report. It had the same name as the eye doctor bill, a clue.
Okay.
There were glasses at the scene, eyeglasses. Unfortunately, they didn't collect the glasses for me to compare to old booking photos and things like that, but they were documented at least. And that's, you take anything you can get on these cold cases. And the fact that someone documented that there were 2 bicycles and eyeglasses were, to me, those were beneficial things. Another thing was those bicycles. Initially, they just noted that there were some bikes there, but they didn't document it. When they went over to Chicago Police Department to check that report, they found that same name as eye doctor bill. And they looked for other contacts with Chicago PD and this individual. And they found that one of the residences he gave was the I-94 overpass at Cicero Avenue. He listed that as his residence. Another big clue. But still, you can't hang all your cards on that and say that this is our guy. It's proof, because it's not proof.
Could be some other homeless person
Right.
that was there and they
Right.
left that information. And once somebody died, they got the hell out of Dodge and just left their stuff there. And
Right.
that could be going down the wrong path. You're just not sure.
Yeah. But one of the stop cards or contact cards, they contacted him. He was in that vicinity of that bridge. And they noted that he was riding a green Magna bicycle. So a very specific description, which, I thought was kind of above and beyond for a contact card. But anyway, the initial investigator went back to the scene. He said, hey, there were bikes there. Let me see if one was a green Magna bicycle. And it was. So he documented that in his report. So I'm taking all these tiny little things that I can take, to move this case along. And again, everybody kind of was under the impression it probably is this guy. We just can't prove it. And so we're not going to close the case until we're able to, make those final determinations and obviously get closure for the family, for any next of kin, any open files that might be out there, things like that in this guy's name. So, we had to keep going. And, unfortunately, there's not a lot to go on.
So all this initial work is done by the responding officers and people involved in the investigation in 2012. But then at some point, they've collected as much information as they can,
Right.
Observed as much as they can. But then at some point, it just goes cold.
Exactly.
And there's nothing else further to do. Fast forward, 10 years, we bring back the Division of Criminal Investigation, and we, develop all the various missions that the Division of Criminal Investigation is going to focus on. We decide cold cases are going to be important for the Illinois State Police. We create the framework and the working group that's working on cold cases. You're a part of that. You get this case, and then what do you do?
Well, again, I'm combing over all these reports, looking for anything that I can extract. Like, is there anything that they missed? You have to go into these old cases with an open mind. You can't, everybody kind of thought, I'm seeing no foul play. I saw it from the trooper. I saw it from the investigator. I saw it from the medical examiner's office. I saw it from the forensic anthropologist. There's no sign of perimortem trauma could be appreciated, is the language that they used. So nothing around the time of death. The scene looks totally undisturbed. So like you figure if there was some sort of violent confrontation or something, his chair would have been knocked over, other things would have been kicked around or strewed around. There was none of that. So I'm kind of making a comparison. Likely a homicide, likely not a homicide, likely natural death. And I'm kind of putting things in both columns, comparing what we have here. And one of the things that was done, thankfully, was that they had extracted, because of the condition of the bones, there's no blood, no tissue. They sent out a bone to it's called the Center for Human Remains. It's out in Texas. And they sent a portion of his bone, one of his bones out there for DNA to be extracted from it. So they did that. They got the extraction. We submitted it to the Illinois State Police Crime Lab. The initial investigators looked up, any family for this guy. They went to the addresses that this individual was last known to reside at. No one there knew him. He hadn't been there in so long. No one knew him. They couldn't find any living family members of him. They finally found what they believed to be a brother. They contact him and they say, hey, do you know where your brother is? And he says, no, I haven't seen him in a number of years. I don't know where he is. And they said, well, we think we may have found him. There's a chance that this individual that we found who's deceased might be your brother. Would you give us a DNA sample?
Where'd they find the brother?
Let me back up to that DNA extraction. They put it into what's called CODIS, the Combined Offender DNA Index. Anybody who's a convicted felon, things like that, we're going to have DNA in there, hopefully. And we can put DNA into that system and see if there's any matches. There is none. We check the missing persons files. There's no matches of anybody matching this description. This individual by this name is not reported missing, but most homeless people aren't going to be reported missing because they're, recluse lifestyle. There's no match in CODIS. And so they find what they believe to be a brother. He's down in Southern Illinois. So obviously with the state police, we've got partners all over the state. We reach out to our partners down south. Hey, can you go get a sample from this guy who's a brother? They explain exactly what they're doing. The guy's very cooperative. He's like, I don't know where the guy is. My brother, we don't talk. I haven't seen him in a number of years, but sure, here's his DNA sample. And I'm, a little bit curious if this is him or not, but, go ahead and test it. So they send that to the state police crime lab, basically essentially saying there's no match. And so that's kind of why the case went cold, because, they said there was no match. The forensic DNA people in our labs, they have to be very careful with how they word things. And they don't typically use the words match, no match,
right.
Things like that. But
percentage,
exactly.
It's a calculation. It's math.
So
it's not a quick little opinion like you see on television or
right.
some made-for-TV, courtroom drama. It's not really that. It's just a question of percentages. What is the likelihood that this is this or this is that?
Right. And again, it's a crime lab. It's not a family DNA center where we test paternity tests and things like that. So they do crimes. So they look at evidence. Is this blood belong to this person? Does this standard match this standard? Things like that. So it's a different type of DNA is what we needed than what they were doing. So I looked at the lab report and I noticed some handwriting on it. There was a couple handwritten notes about a guy found in a river. That was nothing. And then there was another handwritten note that said, not a match based on the understanding that they were the same father. So I said, what the heck does that mean? Does that mean that they might have different fathers, that they could be a match, just different fathers? So I call the scientist up. Thankfully, she's still on the job working. I said, hey, I saw your note here. Can you pull this report up? She can pull the report up still. And she looked it up. I said, your note said not a match based on the understanding that they're the same father. I said, does that mean that they could be related just if they'd had different fathers? She said, yeah, that's what that means. She goes, but we're a crime lab. We do one-to-one comparisons. We don't do familial DNA testing. So she said, you need that. That's the type of DNA testing you need. So she explained that all to me.
Familial DNA.
She tells me, you need to get a sample or see if a sample from that donor, the brother, is around still. See if you still have a sample. And then you need to send it to a private lab that does that specific type of DNA testing, familial genetic DNA testing. And then
which has evolved significantly over the past decade.
Right.
Significantly since this person was found deceased.
Yeah, they can do lots of things with the DNA and like researching family trees and then come up with prospective matches and things like that. So even if this guy wasn't his brother, that type of those advancements in DNA would have been very helpful for us in this case. We could have looked at potential relatives they could have developed from DNA indexes through these. Some people volunteer to, be a part of that when you go into like Ancestry.com or 23andMe, those things. So we checked. There was a sample left from the potential brother, but on the outside chance it wasn't enough or that it had degraded or something like that, I contacted him again. I said, hey, I saw this note. Is there any chance that you guys weren't of the same father? And he laughed. And he said, no, I don't think so. He's like, well, I suppose anything's possible. As far as I know, we had the same father. It was me, him, and my sister. But he's like, I looked like my father. Him and our sister kind of looked more like our mother. And I said, okay, well, that's an interesting bit there. I also found a obituary for the mother, and it listed 2 previous husbands, which I thought was interesting. So I thought, now we're starting to raise these possibilities that, we're on to something here.
Family secrets coming out.
So he says, now, as far as I know, I said, well, is your sister around? So no, she's not around. And she didn't talk to him anyway. She didn't like him, didn't talk to him. The mother's not around anymore. She's deceased. All the fathers are deceased. I say all the fathers,
potential
but yeah,
fathers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then this guy,
into a Jerry Springer episode.
Yeah.
Very quickly.
And he's kind of an elderly gentleman himself. And so I want to catch him while we have the availability and while he's
another sample
cooperative and everything. So I got another sample just in case. Sent that out to that lab out in Texas, and they did their familial DNA testing, and we finally got a result. And yes, they were a match based on different fathers. It was like a 1 in millions of chance that they were not brothers. Basically, is how they listed, something along those lines.
how did the living brother take it?
Well, like I said, he said he hadn't seen him in 30 or 40 years. He didn't, the guy under the bridge didn't go to the mother's funeral. He didn't know where he was living. He said last he knew he was living with the mother, and, she had been out of that address for a number of years prior to her death. And he's like, so I don't know where he is. I don't know. And he's like, I haven't talked to him in 30, 40 years. I said, well, we got those results back. And he said, oh yeah. I said, yeah, it turns out it is a match. So I guess they're saying that it is based on the understanding that you had different fathers. It's a match. And he said, okay, thanks. And that was pretty much it.
Well, but you figured out who it was finally.
Yeah.
You finally got an ID.
Yeah.
You finally got a name. And, no one was beating down our door to try to solve this one. No, there was no outcry from the community. No living family members with, just a lack of closure. They're wondering what's going on, beating on Illinois State Police door to figure this one out. Why is this important, even when there's no one who is asking us to do this? Why is it important to that deceased person? Why is it important to the Illinois State Police? Why is it important to you, as who's someone who's devoted your career to this kind of work? Why does this matter?
Well, it matters because one, it's an open case, and we don't want to rest until all of our cases are resolved. We want closure on all of our cases. We want 100% if we're, that's what we strive for. Of course, you don't always get there, but that's what we strive for. But more importantly than that, this was a living soul, so he deserves some sort of, to be treated with some sort of compassion, some sort of with respect. And this is a way to do that. So even though his family wasn't looking for him, even though there were no loved ones looking for him, it's a way to show some human decency to an individual who, was potentially, marginalized by society. That's why he ended up homeless, perhaps. So, it's a way for us to engage with the community that way, and to show that even though no one's, like you said, banging down our door or anything like that, or demanding answers, we want answers. We want truth. We want to figure out what happened. And we want a little bit, like I said, that satisfaction of getting as close to that 100% as we can. And, that's what we go for.
Well, that's great. And it reflects well on the Illinois State Police and you all, the work that you do on a daily basis. Sometimes the only voice for people is the Illinois State Police. They're their own family members, society, advocates. They may not be trying to bring closure, but it's up to the Illinois State Police to do that. And I think that's great that our people over more than a decade kept at it and finally got an answer as to who this human being was. And now we know. And it's so many lessons learned from that can be applied to so many other cases and are being on a daily basis. And one of the things that you described is, how over time, if evidence is not found right away, how difficult the case can be. I mean, obviously, we by and large respond to crime scenes where there's reports of shots fired or stabbing or a terrible accident of some type, and the evidence is right then and there, very much in front of you, and you can get it in real time. But often there are cases where it's much later after the fact of whatever may have caused the death or been the circumstances of the crime. It's much later that law enforcement is even brought to it, and the environment can obviously have significant impacts on the case. Sergeant Gonzalez, obviously with a crime scene, as a crime scene investigator, you're routinely, in the middle of the night or any time of day, really showing up to crime scenes to be able to collect the evidence. But it's not always as neat and clean and orderly as just, throwing up your crime scene tape, taking some pictures and putting things in the brown paper evidence bags. There are things that can happen, particularly if there's a discovery of evidence well after the crime, or if there's other intervening factors that can make it very difficult to find evidence and to help put these cases together. So, what are some of those challenges that our folks will come across?
Specific challenges with the collecting evidence in different environments. So, for example, we work crime scenes anywhere. If there can be a crime scene, if there's a body there, we're going to go there and we're going to investigate to the best of our ability. Some of the most demanding or some of the hardest areas are water recoveries. So we have many lakes, rivers, everything with our beautiful state. And for example, personally, my region's right next to the Mississippi River, and that is a beast.
A lot of evidence in the Mississippi.
There is a lot of evidence in the Mississippi. It tends to go south. It tends to go south quick, and there are barges, and those tend not to stop. So that's an industrial work zone. I've hung off the end of a barge. We've helped fish bodies out of there, and that's super challenging. So not only are we trying to collect potential homicide evidence, collect the body parts. Also, we're trying to evade other dangers, undertow logs coming down the river at varying speeds. It always seems to be when the river's the worst is when we have to go out there.
So what are some of the unique or interesting methods that you use to process some evidence? So the tools or techniques and the resources that you use to overcome some of the environmental problems that you're dealing with that might impact the quality of your evidence.
Certainly. So a lot of those tools, techniques, honestly, the best thing is a understanding of the resources you have around you. So for example, with a water recovery or anything in an area that you would need help getting with water, local dive teams are great. Any down facing sonar, side scanning sonar, they're wonderful with those. They'll actually help us. We have to have a working knowledge of what they have to offer us, but we also have to be able to tell them what we're looking for and the manner in which we need those items collected. For example, we can't just reach down in the water and pick up a firearm out of that water. That firearm will immediately start rusting. It'll start that process, and we'll lose potential evidence with that. So we have to be able to tell the diver, here's this spot, or here's this container. We want you to go down, sift underneath that for the possibility of any other potential or trace evidence around that. But we also want some of the substrate underneath the firearm itself, and then also the water from which the firearm was taken. We'll actually take that and very carefully get it to one of our 7 labs here in the.
So you want to leave that firearm in the water that it's being recovered from to kind of keep it in that state that it is.
Correct.
Because the moment you take it out, expose it to the air, potential evidence is going to start to break down.
Exactly. We could be losing tool marks on that. Rust could fill those in. We could be losing identification of that firearm. The finish is going to be changed. So we like to collect evidence in situ or as found. So the closer to that is, or that we can collect it, the better. Other environments are arsons, burials, and of course, my favorite is non-permissive environments. So we work in Chicago and East St. Louis. If the evidence is there, we're still going for that as well.
What do you mean by non-permissive environment?
So these are the neighborhoods that are a little more challenged with some crime, little spicy. But no matter what, we'll go down there and use the tools we might need. I've processed quite a few scenes with SWAT right next door, holding a house and doing their work while kind of working my way up to them. It's you just have to know some good friends. and
I've been out of crime scenes in East St. Louis and Chicago, homicides, where there's a lot of the public starts to gather around, and there's people sometimes upset, family members, very emotional, people that are in the mood to retaliate even
Correct.
At times. And in that hostile environment, you're trying to, first of all, identify who it is, who the remains are that are sitting there. You have to go through their wallet or, maybe turn them over. And that can be, very concerning to the people that are watching it, very upsetting. And then also trying to contain those emotions and keep the crowd away. So I've seen it in that, you guys in action as crime scene investigators, where patrol may just have to establish a perimeter to keep people back while you guys do your job, and SWAT even at times if that's absolutely necessary. So that's a factor as always. But you do have a lot of interesting tools of the trade that you have. But tell us about overlaying skin for prints. What is that? I've heard of that,
yep.
But I don't think I've seen that in action.
Okay, I've actually done this myself. It's little different, but we have a few techniques. So I believe what you're getting to is, say if we have a person's hand, We'll start with the fingerprint. So a fingerprint, we're looking for ridge detail. So if everyone looks at their finger, you can see the small little ridges in there. Everyone's is different, and that's how we'll use to identify or find what's different, between different people. With that, when a body decomposes, or say if a body lays out or is in water too long, that ridge detail can expand or contract, and we can lose that ridge detail. With sometimes or a specific
like lines
case,
on a balloon.
Correct.
If you
inflate or deflate
it, the lines might look different.
Exactly, and that roadmap is just going to change. We want to have the manner in which it was printed for the actual one-to-one identification. So with that, certain bodies, you might have skin actually slough off, or actually the hand will deglove, so it'll actually come off that layer of skin. Certain times we can actually dry that off. You use the gloved hand. You take that skin and you can actually put it over your own and fingerprint almost yourself, but you're actually using that the victim's skin.
All right, so explain that to me again, Hannibal Lecter. This sounds really interesting here. So, and again, I think I understand what it is you're saying, but just explain it. So, the skin on a hand has come off the hand of the person whose remains that you're examining. But you put the skin that has been degloved or come off of the victim's or the deceased's hand, and you put it on your own hand.
Oh, or anyone who's willing to assist.
Okay, or any sucker you can find who's willing to put the skin of another hand over their own, like not to deglove, but to like reglove.
Yes, sir.
And then you're using, I guess, sort of the structure of and muscles and skeleton of that person, and then pushing, then taking prints that way.
Correct. It works great. It's
gross, but very cool.
Yes. So this is usually a technique that's used during an autopsy. So that we can actually assist with the degloving to do that. There's other methods where we can.
I assume the individual puts actual, regular medical gloves on that rather than just like straight,
100%. Aseptic technique is key. We want to keep ourselves safe as well. But yeah, we'll go to about any length to identify someone. That's a victim of a crime, a suspect of a crime. We want to know who it is. So we'll set aside, the social norms or, a little churn in your stomach for the new people. I'm well beyond that.
Yeah, I'm sure, I know at a certain point you get very, very numb to it and it just becomes very utilitarian. You're just getting the job done and you're doing whatever it takes to figure out what happened here or figure out who this person is. And that's often the heart and soul of so many of these investigations. Who the hell is this? If you don't know, then how do you, figure out what occurred? What the motive might have been, why they were there, where did they come from? All the things that are necessary if it goes to a criminal investigation to be able to have a prosecutor and a judge and a jury be able to understand what occurred. So that's pretty amazing. That all the techniques that you have in dealing with those challenges that are posed by the environment, and the willingness to actually go so far as to take the skin of the deceased, put it over your own hand in a medical glove, and be able to get the prints that way. I think that's fantastic as an example of how far our people are willing to go to be able to figure out the case and identify the person that may be deceased and to pursue justice in the end. So it's fantastic. Special Agent Arias, so you've been working on a cold case that is still honestly kind of cold. And I know we have lots of them, and we try to work cases as hard as we can when they happen. But then it always is a possibility that you just run out of leads and you run out of options to explore in terms of evidence. And then you maybe come back to it later. You work it. Sometimes you're successful, the way the Master Sergeant described, but sometimes you're still stuck. But the thing that can break you out of that rut and get you out of the ditch and get you going again towards some resolution on the case is often a tip or help from the public. So I know you have one case in particular that you're working. Why don't you tell us about it? And then, when this is out there in the podcast, maybe we'll get some response.
Absolutely. So we are currently, it's really two cases in one, because the first obstacle is to identify a deceased female that was found July of 2003.
Over 23 years ago.
Exactly. It was probably assigned to me about 20 years after the case opened, as I got it shortly after coming to Zone 1. And just like Master Sergeant Thomas said, when you go through the cases, it's not so much a matter of, what did people miss? It's just going over the evidence again and again and again. Because even in that third or fourth pass through the evidence or the reports, you often find something that maybe at first glance doesn't seem very significant, but it's something that we can follow up. And I think we have a couple examples in this case of just things that we added to the case to kind of further it and try to make our best effort to identify this female. A quick overview of the case is male and female are near the Skokie River on a bike path. They're bicycling north.
Where's the Skokie River? Set the stage.
So they're in the area. If you are in the area, it's towards Chicago. It's going to be some of the surrounding areas are Skokie, Northfield, Winnetka, and it's an area that's to this day is still very accessible to the public. If you want to jog, if you want to bike,
Okay.
Maybe back then it was gravel, now it's paved, but it's still an area that's utilized. And if you're familiar with that area of Chicago or that area of the northern suburbs, there's a lot of bike trails. It's very nice, used by tons of people, accessible by cars, depending on the area. But in 2003, in July, or second week of July, a male and female are riding their bikes. The male sees something in the water. He gets off his bike, approaches the water. He actually sees that there is a female, what appears to be a body wrapped in a tarp. Calls the police, naturally. Police respond, initially Northfield. They request fire to come and remove the body. The body is removed. ISP is notified, and we send crime scene investigators and agents at that time from what would be now Zone 1 to the area. CSI does a great job. They take a ton of pictures. And it's important for us because 20 years later, as I'm looking, you want to have a good idea of what you're looking at, the scene, and we wouldn't have that without the photos that CSI took. So they had their old school cameras out at that time. They get the pictures taken. I think they were originally down in the vault in Springfield, which we were able to get. They did some initial field interviews to a male, to the female. There wasn't much else to investigate.
The male and female are just people that...
They were just two people that happened to be on their bikes, and they did the right thing, and they saw something that was out of place, and they called the police. Unfortunately, that was the extent of their knowledge. Just addressing some of the difficulties with water. If somebody's recovered from water in the winter, usually it's when that water thaws. So there's some level of, we'll call it preservation or less decay. In the summer, fortunately for this case, the medical examiner believes that the female was probably in there for about a week. Okay, so it gives us an idea of something we can work off of in terms of missing persons reports or any sort of crimes that happen in the area, any people that have become missing. Maybe someone said, my sister, my neighbor didn't come back from a run or whatever the case may be. We have a timeline, or at least there was an initial timeline, thanks to the medical examiner.
That timeline was about a week before this day in 2002.
Correct. So before
what month was it?
July 12th to be exact, is when she was first observed, and the medical examiner following the autopsy is estimating that the body was in the water approximately a week. The difficulty with that, though, too, is that any time in the water, there's going to be a certain amount of impact. There's going to be some level of bloat, so that can fluctuate the actual weight of the body. What's measured in the autopsy may be different from what the person actually walked around at. Additionally, eye color could be impacted. Skin color can be impacted. So someone that's maybe fair-skinned or darker-skinned, that there can be some fluctuation.
So you could have someone who's walking around alive, and they may have fair skin and weigh 150 pounds, but by the time you get to the autopsy and they've been in water and there's other environmental factors, they may appear to have darker skin, the remains, or they may weigh 190 pounds. It just sort of depends.
There's some level of fluctuation.
Yeah.
Which for us, we felt comfortable with, let's give ourselves a plus and minus in each direction to kind of throw a bigger net out there. So this case was tasked to me, like I said, early on into my career in Zone 1. Went through the case file quite a few times, just looking for something, like Dan said, that, not so much as missed, but maybe could be important. We just didn't see it the first time. And one of the things that we uncovered was that there was a ring that was recovered.
Okay.
So we actually had crime scene go out to the vault in Springfield. They recovered this ring. We still had it as property. It was inventoried. And we were able to photograph it. Of course, 2003, 2023, we go through the evidence that was collected. We contact the lab, get into a conversation about what technology do we have, or what capabilities do we have today that maybe we didn't have 20 years ago. We try to revisit what can be revisited and just get clarification on some of the procedures that were done and some of the things we got back from the lab. So, for instance, during the autopsy, this female was printed. Unfortunately, nothing came back. At one point, DNA was taken from this victim and it was entered into CODIS. That also came back negative, or there was no match, or no, what we'll call hit. When we took a picture of that ring, when we started to look into her a little further, once we actually did a radio interview, which was a little shocking and new to me, but we did a radio interview just kind of get the word out regarding this case. That created a little bit of a buzz, and I'll say that because it started to get people to reach out. So we put a critical reach. We had this ring, we had this information, and I got a forensic artist reach out to me and said, "Hey, I work out of DuPage. This is what I do. Can I help?"
Before you explain what a forensic artist is, tell us about this ring.
So it's a scorpion ring. And again, we don't want to get into theories. We can have opinions.
What's a scorpion ring?
It was just an actual ring where the very top portion of it is a scorpion, a pewter ring. And it was removed.
So made of pewter. Okay. Not a gold ring, not a silver ring, pewter. That's different. Not many people walking around wearing pewter.
Exactly. Now, could it have been something she picked up, at a gift shop? Could have been a gift? Does it have a larger meaning? We don't know, but regardless, it was collected from the victim's body.
So just for people that are listening, we have posted we're going to post the scorpion ring, a picture of the scorpion ring, on our Illinois State Police social media and our website. So if you go to ISP's website, you'll be able to see that ring. So if anybody recognizes it, they'll be able to submit a tip. And we'll at the end of this here, we'll talk about how you can submit a tip. But so people want to envision what this looks like. I mean, it really just looks straight up like a scorpion. It's not even like a small engraving on a ring of a scorpion. It's literally like a small scorpion-like sculpture, if you will, miniature on a ring. And we'll post that on our website. So yeah, that's pretty unique. Not very common. What else were you able to find out about this ring?
So again, the ring was with the remains of the female. And then it started the conversation. You start to get some phone calls. You start to get people just asking questions. And one of them that was very random was the forensic artist from DuPage County who works with their ASA's office out there. The only thing they requested was a little bit of case knowledge and then some autopsy photos that would help them maybe do a rendering that would do justice by what the appearance was of the female.
So what's a forensic artist?
My understanding is that this is a person that's going to, let's say, a missing persons cases. Maybe you have a victim of a crime that says this is what the offender looked like. They can do a rendering of offenders, suspects, missing persons based off of physical descriptions. And in this case, based off of autopsy photos. This person will take some of the information that they see in the autopsy. They will take some of the information that they see in the crime scene photos or in the autopsy photos, and they can start to do a rendering that they think will help further the case. And we added that. Once we put that all out there, we did a critical reach. I started to get some very interesting phone calls.
They were able to put together a sketch?
Yes, they did.
And what was in this sketch?
It was, so he did one of it would just be just kind of, I would say, shoulders and up with hair equivalent to what the female had. Facial features. We did one with the teeth showing because there was some, I wouldn't say unique, but just maybe unique to that individual, her teeth, the way they were. So he did 2 renderings, and we posted one with the picture of just a quick overview of what we were trying to accomplish with the picture, and then with the ring itself.
And just for everybody who's listening, we'll put that forensic sketch on our website as well and on our social media. So you got that, and that started generating some additional interest. How have things progressed since then?
Well, in the background, this whole time, the state police had been in the works with a private lab to take some of the DNA from the victim, bone in this case, because I was in a conference call that was well over my head with a bunch of scientists, and it was determined that they were going to take bone, and it would be submitted to a private lab, and they would do genealogy testing. It's very time consuming because what they'll do is they'll go back, they'll use public databases for any sort of, I'll just use an example of like 23andMe, something like that. People that have willingly put their DNA into the system or into databases in the public sector, and then they'll try to find a common ancestor. Once they find a common ancestor, then they'll try to work forward and see if there's any living relatives. That is all happening now in the background. We don't have that information yet. Hopefully we will. I'm cautiously optimistic, but we don't have that yet because it does take an enormous amount of time.
So familial DNA is in the works, but we still need help from the public.
Absolutely.
We still need to connect the dots. We still need to try to develop any further leads that are possible to be able to identify this person. Now, let me ask you, was there a cause of death for this person?
So much like the case that Master Sergeant Thomas talked about, because we haven't identified her, Cook County Medical Examiner has yet to determine yet.
All right. Once the person is identified, will they be able to reach any conclusion?
Yes, because we will hopefully, what we're able to do is we partner with them. So there's certain things like the finding the ring and the forensic sketch. We share that with the medical examiner's office, who then uploads that information because they maintain an account through NAMUS, which is a huge database where missing persons are entered often. So we partner with them, we work with them, and any information that we get, we share with them. If we're able to identify her, we'll share that information. Hopefully they'll move forward with an autopsy, which will then, like I said, it's almost a tale of two cases, because that'll move us into, once we find out who she was, we'll find out what happened to her.
Okay. Well, that's great. I mean, you're working it. And even though it's a long time ago, over 2 decades ago, things are moving forward. And absent the work that you've done, it would really be going nowhere. That's not to say we've got it all figured out.
Not yet.
Not at all. That's not to say we can't use some help. We certainly can. So that's why it's important, if the public has any tips, to be able to share that information with us to help us advance the case. If you go to the Illinois State Police website at isp.illinois.gov, and you look at the quick links tab, there is an option to click submit a crime tip. And we'll have a picture of the scorpion ring and a forensic sketch of the deceased in this case. That'll be there. And if you have information about this particular crime, you can submit a crime tip. And obviously, you've gone on the radio, talked about it a little bit, generated some interest, and you're following that. We're going to put it on our social media, put it on this podcast. And we'll use every avenue we can to make people aware of this case. And that way, if they have some information that is helpful, they can share that, even if it might not be helpful. Sometimes there's little pieces of information that come to mind, and you don't even understand the significance of it. But if you share that with someone who's investigating the case, they may see the value of that. It may be a piece of the puzzle that no one else knows about. You can connect to the bigger picture. So we do ask for the public's help in this case and any other cold cases that we're continuing to work. So I want to thank Master Sergeant Dan Thomas. I want to thank Special Agent Andres Arias. And I want to thank Crime Scene Investigator Sergeant Justin Gonzalez. Thank you guys all for being here today as part of this podcast for the Illinois State Police, talking about cold cases. I've said this before, but it's definitely quite evident when you're talking about how our people investigate cold cases. These are cases that are sometimes decades old, and in some of the most probably gross, disgusting environments, or mentally challenging, or even physically challenging environments. To be able to figure these cases out. But it's an example of how the Illinois State Police just never give up. They continue. They persist. Our motto with our values is integrity, service, and pride. Illinois State Police, ISP, integrity, service, and pride. But sometimes the P is not just for pride. It is about persistence. Just like water on a rock. Keep at it. Try to get some answers. Never give up. There's new technology emerging every day. There's new tips coming from the public every day. There's new resources we've devoted to these cold cases. So it's really important. And again, it's one of the great things about the Illinois State Police and the great work that you all do in your lifelong careers here with the Illinois State Police. So I thank you. I thank everybody for listening today. And remember, if you've got a tip about this case or any case, go to www.isp.illinois.gov, click on the Quick Links tab, and then click Submit a Crime Tip. And with that, thank you all for joining us today.
As we close this file, troopers will be ready to help with your questions. State Police is recorded and edited by Sam Rusink. Original theme music composed by David Huizinga. Produced by Trooper Tammy Wellborn. Remember, good needs to get louder. Until next time, I'm Bill Curtis.